All right, in this video, I'm going to go into detail on all the most common myths that you've probably heard about land and why you probably heard you should stay away from land and things like that, and why nothing could be further from the truth. Again, my wife and I have flipped over 4,500 pieces of land, going on 5,000 pieces of land. We have quietly made millions of dollars in the land space, and our preferred holding time for land is 5 minutes. In other words, I'm going to show you exactly how you can take everything that you ever heard about land, move it off to the side, and learn something new. Because land is the best and most overlooked and most misunderstood asset class that has ever existed in real estate. And it's about to explode. So with that said, let's get going. So the first myth out there is that land is expensive. People talk about land doesn't take land, it takes a lot of time to develop it, it costs millions of dollars, and so on and so forth. Well, you know what? This myth is actually true, but only for about 1% of the land out there. When people hear land, what they're thinking about is that downtown 5 acres that's right in the middle of skyscrapers, that's perfect to put a ballpark on there, or perfect to build another skyscraper on there, that costs $50 million, that's gonna take 3 years to actually entitle and develop, and then another $100 million to put a high-rise on there or something like that. And in the process, if you do that in the wrong cycle of the real estate, and you end up finishing that project when real estate is down, you lose your shirt. That's what people think about when talking about land. However, there are millions of pieces of land out there in the outskirts of town, or even in normal residential areas, infill lots, in stable areas, where the houses are worth $500,000, where the lot is worth $100,000, where the owner wanted to build their house on there, life and circumstances changed, and they're willing to give that property up for $50,000 right now, and you can pick that thing up and sell it to the builder the next day, and for $75,000 or $80,000, and make $25,000 to $30,000 in a quick wholesale transaction, similarly to a house wholesale, just with land. That brings me to the next myth. The next myth is that land doesn't cash flow. And again, you know what? Typically that is actually true. However, if you approach land in a completely different way, it doesn't matter if land doesn't cash flow. And as a matter of fact, you can make land cash flow. So let's talk about that from 2 different angles. Angle number 1 is if you look at land as something that you can wholesale and flip the same way that you can wholesale and flip houses, then it doesn't matter if it cash flows or not. You simply take a $100,000 piece of land, put it on a contract for $30,000, and then flip, turn around and sell it for $70,000, make a $40,000 profit, and do that again, and again. On top of it, with land, particularly as you go outside of the cities into what's called the path of growth, there are lots and lots of land, or pun intended here, right? Lots of lots that are worth only about $20,000 or $30,000 or $40,000 that the owners no longer want. The owners have held on to them for decades. Life and circumstances change. Perhaps they passed away. The heirs have it now. Perhaps they just don't want them anymore. And they're willing to give them away for pennies on the dollar. These lots are usually owned free and clear because banks also don't lend on land. That's a myth. That's true. The bank don't lend on land. But it's actually a positive because if they own this piece of land free and clear, 100% equity, and perhaps 40 years ago, they paid $5,000 for this land. Now it's worth $30,000. And they don't even care. They might be taking a $5,000 offer on that piece of land. And then you turn around and put it on the market, market it properly, and sell that piece of land at a discount of market value. So it's worth 30. You sell it for, let's say, 18. And you make a $13,000 profit without ever needing that piece of land to make cash flow. Because there's lots of buyers also. That's the other myth. Land just sits there. Land doesn't sell. Well, that's not true either. But let's talk about that a little bit later because there's the second aspect of how do you make land cash flow? Well, there's many ways. Way number 1 is you can actually rent it out to a farmer. The farmer then goes and rents it and uses it for farming and typically pays you a percentage of the crop value at the end of the year. So right there, you got cash flow from land. Another way, if it's a piece of land that's more in the city, you can actually put a billboard on it or you can put a cell phone tower on there. Or you can perhaps rent it to somebody for a farmer's market. You can rent it to a construction company to put their equipment on there if they have a project close by. As a matter of fact, we have done that. We have had an acre property on a main road, commercially zoned, that we got that was worth $300,000. We got it for $90,000, and we got a construction company that got a big job by that city to pay us $2,000 a month to rent it for a year and a half. Well, that's over 18 months to $2,000 a month. That's $36,000 over the course of a year and a half. So we gotten a 36 or about 40% off our money that we paid in this property right away back, and over a course of just a year and a half. And then we turned around and sold that property for $199,000 and made a total of $137,000 in profits. So again, who says that land doesn't cash flow? On top of it, you can also, our favorite way of making land cash flow is to actually sell land with seller financing. Remember what I just said? Banks don't lend on land. So if banks don't lend on land and you have a property that's worth $50,000, let's say it's out in the outskirts of town, the seller has owned it for 40 years, they don't care about it anymore, their kids don't want it anymore, perhaps one spouse passed away already, and they're like, I don't care about it, or both spouses passed away and you're dealing with the heirs, you can get the deal like that under contract for, let's say, $10,000. We have done thousands of deals like that. We actually built the cash flow from land up to $71,000 using this exact method. So what you do now is you have it under contract for $10,000, and what you do is you turn around and you now sell it for $40,000 to $50,000. So at full market value, but because you understand that there's not too many people out there who simply have $50,000 to plunk down on a piece of land, but there's a lot of people out there who can actually make a $10,000 down payment and then monthly payments of $500. So what you do is, instead of just demanding a $50,000 cash price for the property, because that's what most people do, and because of that, for most people, the land sits there. It's a true myth. Land typically sold at full market value, and where you demand a full cash price often sits for half a year or so before it sells. But the moment you add one component to it, which is seller financing, the moment that you say, you know what, I want $50,000 for this property, but I allow you to buy this property with just a 20% down payment. So 20% of $50,000 is $10,000. So the moment you allow that to happen, guess what? Your buyer's pool is now opening up. Instead of having 10 people who can afford $50,000, you now got 500 people who can afford a $10,000 down payment and a $500 a month monthly payment. So you do that, and guess what? You have the property under contract for $10,000. You now sell it for $50,000. You get a $10,000 down payment, which means that at the moment that you sell the property, you get all your money back. And that's the beauty of land flipping. You can't do that in the typical house. You sell a $300,000 house, you get it under contract for, even if you get it under contract for $200,000, it needs some fix up, you need to put the money for the fix up in place. And even if you then sell it for $300,000 with seller financing, the most you'll probably get down is $30,000, and you're still out all that money. Well, not so with land. If you put it under contract, if it's worth $50,000, you put it under contract for $10,000, you can sell it at $50,000 with a $10,000 down payment, you have zero money in the deal, and now the buyer pays the remaining $40,000 in monthly payments of $500 for the next 15 years. Because on top of them owing you $40,000 still, you get to charge a hefty interest rate on that amount that they still owe you. It's basically you're creating a loan, you're creating a note. But the biggest difference is that you are now on the receiving side of the loan payment. You become the bank. And that's a beautiful place to be. So as a result, you're now receiving $500 a month for 15 years. That adds up to $90,000. So you put in 10 grand, you get right away 10 grand back, you get cash flow $500, and therefore it adds up to $90,000. That's how land is actually better than many other asset classes. So in combination, you can make land cash flow by renting it, by adding all these different things, particularly by seller financing, By focusing on the right kind of lands, the infill lots, the lots outside of the city, or even larger recreational acreage that is very interesting to all the people that want to go have dirt bikes and RVs and things like that, you have an asset class that is actually in high demand. There's lots of people who want to buy them. There's lots of people who want to sell them for cheap. And you can make a ton of money with land. And by offering seller financing and by offering discounts, because you can get them so cheap, that you can overcome all the other reasons why land is supposed to be a bad investment and make it into the best investment in real estate. You can sell them in a matter of a few days. You can make the same cash and cash flow that you get from houses without any tenants, toilets, and termites. In other words, land is just the most overlooked asset class in the entire real estate world. And on top of it, because of some market forces that are actually combining right now, land is on the way to become the new real estate revolution in the year 2024. But I'll have a different video about that. With that said, if you want to know how to create your own land business, how to find out how to get those deals for 10, 20, 30 cents on the dollar, how to sell them for 70, 80, or even 100% of market value, and how to create land cash flow, then simply go to landblueprint.com. See you in the next video.